My wife started turning her phone face down in the middle of ordinary happiness, and that is how my marriage began to die in Key West. It did not begin with lipstick on a collar, a hotel receipt, or some stranger's message dropping into my life like a grenade. It began at our kitchen island with yellow light on the butcher block counter, sea wind pressing softly against the windows, and Haley smiling at me while her hand moved over her phone with the tiny, practiced urgency of someone protecting a second life. If you like stories where love, betrayal, and quiet revenge all collide without a single wasted beat, subscribe to Reddit Ride, because this one started with a phone and ended with me walking out of my own dinner party with more peace than I had left in the marriage. My name is Chuck Brenner. I was 32 then, and for the last 8 years I had been married to Haley, who was 34 and somehow always looked like she belonged in the center of whatever room she entered. I coached at a small college program, the kind of job people romanticize until they realize most of it is recruiting calls, film review, donor lunches, and trying to keep 19-year-olds from ruining their own futures in one weekend. Haley ran a web store that sold high-end coastal decor, curated gift sets, and all the soft, expensive things people bought when they wanted their houses to look effortless. She had the kind of beauty that did not ask for attention because it had already learned how to own it. She was polished in a way that made older money trust her and younger women copy her. From the outside, we looked steady. We looked affectionate. We looked like a couple who had figured out how to keep romance alive in a place where everything already looked like vacation. We had dinner on the porch 2 or 3 nights a week. We hosted small gatherings with people from the college, a few local business owners, and the kind of friends who liked good wine, clean candles, and stories about boats they did not actually own. Haley kissed me when I came in the door. I rubbed her shoulders while she answered late customer emails. We had that easy physical shorthand that makes a marriage look secure, even when something poisonous has already taken root under the floorboards. The first thing that bothered me was not even a lie. It was a rhythm change. Haley had always been casual with her phone. She left it on the bathroom sink, on the coffee table, sometimes under a magazine on the porch. Then, without ever announcing the shift, she started carrying it from room to room. She took it to the laundry room. She took it outside when she watered the potted palms. She flipped it over when a notification lit the screen. Once, while we were watching a show and she had her legs folded over mine, the phone buzzed on the cushion beside her. She saw the screen, turned it face down so fast it almost looked funny, and then laughed at something on the television a second too late. I noticed because coaching had made me a student of tiny tells. You watch young men long enough and you learn the difference between guilt, nerves, fear, and performance. You learn when somebody is late because they overslept, and when they are late because they are hiding a decision. Love makes you generous, but pattern recognition never really shuts off. I told myself it was business. That was the first mercy I offered her. Her store had been growing. She had more orders, more vendor messages, more influencer nonsense, more brides wanting custom welcome baskets for destination weddings. Key West was full of money and fantasy, and Haley had built a profitable little empire selling people a version of both. So when her phone became more guarded, I gave it a respectable explanation. Then came the valet slip. It was folded inside a small coral-colored gift bag from one of the resorts on the island, tucked beneath tissue paper, and a thank you card from a bridal vendor Haley had said she barely knew. She had come home from an event carrying 3 bags, kicked off her shoes, kissed me on the cheek, and headed upstairs to shower before dinner. I was clearing packaging from the island when I lifted the tissue paper to flatten the bag for recycling and saw the slip lodged at the bottom. The date was that night. The time was 48 minutes earlier. The location was a private waterfront hotel downtown that used valet only for banquet events and members' dinners. The vehicle listed was not hers. I remember standing there with that pale little slip in my hand, feeling my stomach tighten in a way that had nothing to do with proof and everything to do with instinct. A valet ticket by itself meant nothing. Haley was constantly moving through event spaces, vendor showcases, and styled receptions. Somebody could have dropped it in the bag by accident. It could have been attached to a gift table. It could have belonged to anyone. Still, I slid it into my pocket before she came back downstairs. That night, I watched her more carefully. She wore a white lounge set I liked, curled one leg under herself on the couch, and told me about a florist who wanted too much space near a sponsor wall. She laughed in all the usual places. She reached over once and stole a piece of mango from my plate. If there was a secret in the room, it was sitting inside her as comfortably as a second heartbeat. I did not ask about the valet slip. Patient observation, I learned, is a brutal talent when you apply it to your own life. Over the next 6 days, I noticed everything. I noticed that her phone now went on silent after dinner. I noticed that she took it with her to brush her teeth. I noticed that twice, when we were in bed and she thought I was asleep, the light of the screen moved softly across her face, and she smiled with a kind of private warmth that never reached me. I noticed that when I walked into the room unexpectedly, her thumb would hover over the screen for a fraction of a second before locking it. Most of all, I noticed that she had become very generous. That might sound strange, but guilt has a way of dressing itself as tenderness. Haley brought me coffee before my morning workouts. She left little notes in my laptop bag. She asked whether I wanted to plan a long weekend after the season settled. She touched me more often. She was warmer in public. She looked like a woman investing in her marriage, while quietly withdrawing from it somewhere I could not see. By the end of that week, I no longer believed it was only business. The second clue came on a Thursday night at a donor cocktail hour for the athletic department. Haley came because she was good at these things, because she could make a middle-aged booster feel interesting, and a nervous young assistant dean feel included in the same 5 minutes. I was working the room in my blazer, talking recruiting and fundraising and the eternal problem of conditioning budgets, when I saw her on the terrace with a man I recognized but could not place immediately. He was wearing a linen jacket the color of sand and holding his drink like he had been born doing it. He leaned in when Haley spoke. She touched his forearm lightly as she laughed. It was not sexual from a distance. It was polished, social, harmless if you did not know your own wife well enough to see when her smile belonged to the room and when it belonged to one person. Then he said something I could not hear, and Haley looked down for half a second with a softness I had not seen directed at me in months. That was when I remembered him. Ethan Vale. He ran a luxury charter and hospitality brand that serviced weddings, private excursions, and sponsor events. He was the kind of man local magazines loved. Divorced, expensive watch, perfect stubble, good causes in public, better instincts in private, if rumors were to be believed. I had met him twice, in passing at college-adjacent charity functions. He had the smooth attention of a man who had learned that listening well was just another form of seduction. When Haley came back inside, she kissed my cheek in front of a booster's wife and introduced me to a decorator from Miami, as if everything in our life was exactly where it belonged. I smiled. I kept watching. Patient observation will destroy your illusions slowly enough that you can still function while they bleed out. I started leaving my office door cracked at home when I worked on film, because from there I could hear the back porch and most of the kitchen. Twice, while Haley thought I was occupied, she took calls outside and lowered her voice just enough to turn language into tone. Once she laughed and said, "You are terrible," in a way that was not offended at all. Another time she said, "No, he'll be at practice until 7, and even from 3 rooms away I felt something inside me go rigid. He'll be at practice until 7. Not Chuck. Not my husband. He. A schedule note. A coverage window. A simple operational fact. I did not go outside. I did not interrupt. I sat in my chair with recruiting tape paused on the screen and stared at a 19-year-old point guard frozen mid-drive, while my marriage shifted into a new category. That Friday, I checked our shared calendar. Haley had a habit of plugging joint events into it because she liked color-coded order. Over the last 4 months, I found repeated entries that looked harmless on their face. Vendor consult, gifting drop, sponsor prep, downtown walkthrough, hotel sample review. They were almost always slotted into evenings when I had practice, game film, donor dinners, or road-related prep. Individually, each item made sense. Collectively, they looked engineered. I cross-checked with what I remembered. 3 of those nights, she had come home in elevated moods that had nothing to do with business. Once she had arrived carrying a gift bag from a resort and said a client overordered sample candles. Once she came back wearing a perfume I did not recognize and told me a stylist at an event had been overspraying the prep room. Once she had forgotten to put her ring back on until halfway through dessert. The affair was not proven yet. The architecture of one was. The hardest part about betrayal is that it makes memory treacherous. Once suspicion enters the room, the past starts shifting under your feet. I would be in the weight room with my players, whistle around my neck, half focused on form and footwork, and suddenly remember Haley turning her phone away while smiling at some message I never saw. I would be driving across the island and remember that she had once said Ethan Vale was surprisingly grounded for that type, which at the time had sounded like a throwaway social judgment and now felt like a breadcrumb I had walked right over. A week later, I got the proof I did not want. Haley left her phone on the bathroom counter while she was out on the porch taking a customer call from her laptop. It lit up twice while I was passing the hall. I did not touch it the first time. The second time I looked, the preview on the lock screen was short enough to fit in one line. Where the blue won tonight. No name, no emoji, no context, just a familiarity so intimate it made the hallway tilt. I walked away before she came back in. My heart was beating hard enough to make my shoulders feel heavy. There are moments when a marriage ends emotionally before either spouse has spoken a word. That was one of mine. The phone preview was not graphic. It was not even explicit, but it contained private authority, private knowledge, and private anticipation. Someone else was selecting the version of my wife he wanted to see. That night Haley wore a blue dress to private dinner, hosted by a resort manager who sourced pieces from her web store. I told her she looked beautiful. I meant it, and that made me hate the whole thing more. If you have ever loved someone while beginning to understand that they are humiliating you in parallel, then you know there is a special kind of nausea in still finding them beautiful. I did not confront her after the blue dress message. I needed to understand how deep the cut went. Rage is for men who want noise. I wanted truth, so I kept watching. Over 11 days, the pattern sharpened. Haley's phone behavior intensified before events involving Ethan's company or properties he worked with. She changed earrings twice before one harbor dinner, then checked her phone smiling before choosing the second pair. She once said she was heading out early to solve a linen mess, but I saw, from the upstairs window, that she sat in her car for 3 full minutes before driving off, smiling down at her screen like a girl meeting someone she had no right to miss. Then came the reveal that made everything worse. I was in the office at the gym annex reviewing travel paperwork when I got a text from a parent asking whether our booster dinner was still on for Saturday. I knew the event, but the timing bothered me because Haley had told me she had first met Ethan Vale, sometime after New Year's, at a styled hospitality mixer where he was impossible to avoid. The parent's text included a flyer image from the previous summer, because she was asking whether the format would be similar. There in the lower corner of the old flyer photo, smiling near a silent auction display, stood Haley and Ethan together. Not this winter. Last summer. I zoomed in until the image blurred. Haley was holding a champagne flute. Ethan's head was turned toward her. She was looking up at him with that same attentive softness I had seen on the terrace weeks earlier. The affair was longer than expected. That fact did not hit me as jealousy. It hit me as theft. 8 years of marriage. At least 9 or 10 months of division. Maybe more. A polished house, affectionate routines, dinner with friends, plans for the future, all of it sharing wall space with a private life I had never been invited to audit. I drove home that afternoon under a sky so bright it felt offensive. Key West was all color and salt and postcard confidence, and I remember thinking there was something almost cruel about paradise hosting this kind of decay so casually. That evening, Haley asked whether I could help ice wine glasses for a dinner we were hosting the following weekend. She wanted it a little elevated, because Ethan's company might start sponsoring one of the college's event weekends, and a few local people would be there whom she wanted to impress. She said that standing at the sink in one of my t-shirts, like a wife asking for help with a party in a normal marriage. I looked at her and understood, almost peacefully, that the confrontation would happen at that dinner. Not in public, not as a spectacle, but there, in the center of the polished life she had used as cover. Once I knew the setting, everything inside me got calmer. I met with an attorney the next Monday. He was a neat, unsentimental man on Truman Avenue who seemed to recognize immediately that I was not there to threaten, posture, or beg for strategy around reconciliation. He asked how certain I was. I said certain enough to leave with dignity. He nodded like that was the smartest thing I had said all week. I took copies of what mattered: financial snapshots, property documents, the old event photo, a written timeline, notes about her schedule pattern, and the phone preview. None of it was meant to create a courtroom drama. It was meant to anchor reality. People like Haley survived on tone, on charm, on making hard facts feel impolite. I needed something that would not blink when she did. The days before the dinner were surreal. Haley was almost glowing. She finalized menus, adjusted place cards, and talked about layered citrus candles and whether we should open the French rosé first or second. She kissed me more. She slept close. One night she laid her head on my chest and said, "I feel like we've been really good lately." And I stared into the dark above our bed and thought, "You mean you have been very comfortable?" The dinner was on a Saturday, warm and windless, the kind of Key West evening that makes every backyard look expensive even when it is mostly string lights and good staging. We hosted 12 people, 2 boosters, a resort manager, a designer Haley worked with, Ethan Vale, a married couple from one of the charter brands, a faculty spouse, enough polish to make the table glow. Haley wore cream silk. Ethan arrived with a bottle of something French and a smile that managed to look gracious and proprietary at the same time. He shook my hand like a man who assumed he understood the limits of my knowledge. I took the bottle, thanked him, and seated him where Haley had arranged him 2 seats away from her. She thought she was being subtle, careless with details. That was always her flaw. People imagine affairs reveal themselves in obvious sparks, but the most devastating evidence is often logistical. Eye lines, timing, familiarity. Who speaks when? Who waits for whose reaction? Who is already carrying private knowledge into public conversation? Haley asked Ethan about a marina issue before he had mentioned it to the table. He made a joke about her saving his weekends again, then corrected it too late into something more socially acceptable. Once during dessert, he reached automatically for the bottle of sparkling water she preferred and set it beside her without asking. Nobody else seemed to notice. I noticed everything. I lasted through coffee. Then I stood and said, in the calm voice I used when I wanted a team to settle down without losing respect for me, "Haley, can you help me in the kitchen for a minute?" She came in smiling. That smile disappeared when she saw the folder on the counter. The kitchen was bright, clean, and brutally ordinary. A row of wine glasses near the sink. Candle light from the patio doors. The muffled sound of people still talking outside, including Ethan, who had not yet realized that the evening he thought belonged partly to him had just narrowed into a hallway with no exits. Haley looked from the folder to me. "What is this?" It was not a question asked in innocence. It was a question asked by someone whose body had recognized danger before her mind finished parsing it. I slid the folder toward her and said, "It is the part where you stop deciding what I know." The color drained from her face with a speed that would have been dramatic if it had not been so ugly. "Chuck, open it." She opened it. She saw the old event photo, the timeline, the copied calendar pattern, the note about the lock screen message, the valet slip, my written list of dates, and corresponding cover stories. She did not touch the pages long. She did not need to. A smart liar knows almost instantly when the floor has been built under them and when it has not. "You went through my things," she said quietly. That was the first refuge she chose. Not denial, not apology, procedure. I looked at her and almost admired the instinct. You built another relationship inside my marriage, I said. Do not insult me with admin language. Her eyes filled then, but not from guilt alone. From loss of control. Haley lived on presentation. The right room, the right angle, the right emotional temperature. What she could not survive well was being pinned to fact by someone she had already mentally downgraded into a supportive husband with a schedule. It is not what you think, she said. I smiled once, though there was no humor in it. That sentence is for people who still need imagination. I don't. She swallowed hard and looked toward the patio doors as though she could somehow sense Ethan's presence through glass. Not tonight, she whispered. Please, not tonight. That told me more than any confession could have. Not the marriage, not the betrayal, the room, the image, the audience nearby. I stepped closer, kept my voice low, and said, Tonight is the first honest thing that has happened in this house in months. She started crying then, but it was disciplined crying, the kind people like Haley do when they want grief to remain pretty. She shook her head and reached for my wrist. I stepped back before she touched me. How long? I asked. She shut her eyes. Chuck, how long? There was a pause in which I heard silverware outside and someone laughing softly at something Ethan had said. 9 months, she whispered. I believed the number because it aligned too neatly with what I had found. Did you love him? That question came out flatter than I expected. Not dramatic, just tired. Haley looked at me with real confusion then, as if she genuinely did not know which answer would do less damage. That is not simple, I nodded slowly. Then it was real enough to destroy us. She cried harder at that, and for a second I saw something almost like honesty come through the panic. I did love you, she said. That may have even been true. It did not save her. You loved being admired by me while being chosen by him, I said. That is not the same thing. She made a sound then, half sob, half surrender. The line landed because it was precise. People like Haley can survive anger. Precision is what cuts them open. From outside, a patio chair scraped softly. Conversation kept moving. The world always keeps moving, even when your private life reaches the cliff edge. What happens now? She asked. I slid a second envelope onto the counter. I leave tonight, I said. You explain whatever version of this you can live with to the people outside. You do not call me after midnight pretending you suddenly found clarity. My attorney has what he needs. You can speak to yours on Monday. Her head snapped up. You already did all that. Yes. She stared at me like that was the cruelest part, that while she was still managing table settings and text threads and emotional compartments, I had quietly stepped out of the part of the marriage where her charm still mattered. Chuck, please, she said. Don't make me walk back out there like this. I looked toward the patio doors, where warm light and polished voices still floated under the palms. You should have thought about that before inviting him to my table. That was the moment she finally broke in a way that looked less curated. Her shoulders dipped. Her mouth trembled without elegance. She looked older by 5 years and somehow far less adult. I never meant for you to find out like this. I picked up my car keys from the counter. There was no version that honored me. She understood that. I saw it hit. Before I turned away, I gave her the only confrontation line that felt true enough to keep. You didn't lose me tonight, I said. You lost me every time you came home acting innocent. Then I walked out through the side hallway, past the coat stand, into our bedroom. I packed one overnight bag. Shirts, running shoes, toiletries, the small framed photo of my late father from the dresser. Nothing dramatic, just the first layer of departure. When I came back through the hall, I could hear a different silence outside now. Not dead silence, tense silence. The kind that tells you the emotional weather has changed, even if the words have not traveled clearly. I stepped onto the patio in my blazer with the bag in my hand. Every face turned. Haley was not behind me yet. Ethan looked at the bag first, then at my face, and I watched comprehension move through him in a quiet, ugly wave. He stood halfway out of his chair without seeming to know why. Chuck, one of the boosters said, trying for lightness, everything all right? I looked at him, then at the table, then finally at Ethan. No, I said, but I'm done carrying the heavier half of it. That was all. I did not point. I did not expose details. I did not perform pain for the benefit of an audience. I just set my napkin on the empty chair, took one last look at the house that had held two versions of my life at once, and walked out through the gate. Behind me, I heard Haley say my name. I did not turn around. The thing people never understand about dignified leaving is how physical it feels. You are not just making a statement. You are dragging yourself out of a field of gravity that has been trained on your loyalty for years. Every step away from that table felt both unnatural and cleaner than anything I had done in months. I checked into a small inn near the quieter end of the island. The room smelled faintly like salt and old wood polish. I sat on the bed with my bag at my feet and stared at the wall for a long time before calling my attorney's after-hours line to leave a simple message. "It's done," I said. Then I showered, turned off the light, and lay awake listening to the ceiling fan cut the dark into slow circles. Haley called 7 times that night. I answered none of them. She sent messages that moved through every phase exactly the way you would expect from a woman trying to save both her future and her self-image at once. "Please, let's talk. Please do not do this in a hotel. Please come home." It did not mean what it looks like. I was confused. "I made a mistake. I love you. Please do not tell anyone else. Please do not humiliate me." That last part landed harder than all the rest. Do not humiliate me. Not because it was wrong, but because it told the truth in reverse. She understood humiliation perfectly well. She simply objected now that it had changed direction. The next month was paperwork, division, practical decisions, and the strange flattening that comes after emotional catastrophe. Word spread the way it always does in a small, social place. Not with one explosion, but with tasteful fragments. Something happened at the Brenners' dinner. Haley and Chuck are separating. Ethan Vale has stopped showing up to a few shared circles. One of Haley's local partnerships cooled off. Nobody said much directly to me, which I appreciated. Coaches live enough of their lives in public already. Haley tried twice more to meet in person. I declined twice more. Ethan sent one message. I never opened it. The house was sold 6 months later. I kept only what felt uncorrupted by memory. Books, training notes, my father's photo, a teak chair from the porch, a cast iron pan. It is remarkable how little of a life you need once the performance layer burns off. Peaceful solitude is not cinematic. It is smaller than that and better. It is making coffee before sunrise in a place where no one is lying to you. It is running along water that does not ask questions. It is finishing a long practice, driving home, and realizing your shoulders are not braced for another evening of subtle disrespect. It is silence without dread. About a year later, after the legal part was done and the emotional weather had changed from storm to scar tissue, I met someone who reminded me that triangles only feel glamorous to the people standing outside them. Real love is simpler. Real love does not thrive on hidden timing windows, secret smiles over locked screens, or a room arranged so one man can be adored while another man pays the bills for the candles. Her name was Mara. She taught marine biology seminars part-time and laughed with her whole face. There was nothing polished social climber about her. She wore sun-faded shirts, forgot earrings on countertops, and listened in a way that made me feel less like a role and more like a person. We did not begin dramatically. No violins, no lightning, just coffee after a fundraiser I almost skipped, then a walk, then another conversation, then the slow return of something I had nearly mistaken for naivety when it was actually hope. I told her the truth in pieces. She never once asked me to soften it so she could feel more comfortable. That mattered. Before I tell you how this really ended, subscribe to Reddit Ride for more stories where betrayal gets exposed, but dignity still gets the last word. Mara and I did not save each other. Adults who have survived enough know better than to make romance carry that kind of vanity. What we built was steadier, cleaner. It had no secret doors in it, no private theater running behind the visible life. If she said she would call, she called. If she smiled at me across a room, I never had to wonder whether the warmth belonged partly to someone else. One evening, nearly 2 years after the dinner party, I was back in Key West for an alumni event and walked past the waterfront hotel where I had first found that valet slip folded inside the coral-colored gift bag. The light was golden. Staff in white shirts moved briskly through the entrance. A valet stand gleamed in the same polished way it always had. And I realized, standing there with the sea wind coming in and the old memory right in front of me, that I felt almost nothing. Not numbness, freedom. Haley had once mistaken my steadiness for blindness. Ethan had mistaken my silence for ignorance. They were both wrong in the same lazy way. Quiet men notice more than people think. We just tend to delay the funeral until we are certain the patient is dead. I kept walking. Mara was meeting me later for dinner at a small place off Duval with bad chairs and perfect fish. My phone buzzed once in my pocket with a text from her asking whether I wanted key lime pie after. I smiled before I even answered. Yes, I wrote back. Save me a bite. Then I slipped the phone away, crossed the street, and kept moving through the warm evening like a man who no longer owed his past an audience. Haley wanted admiration, Ethan wanted access, and I wanted love. That was the triangle. Only one of those things could survive daylight.